welcome to our Crossing Archive. Here's where you can find all of our full services from our Crossing online experience. This week we are starting our brand new series called The Truth of Everything. It's going to be an incredible series and I can't wait to get into it. But before that, we've got some amazing worship for you. Thanks for watching.
You're stacking stone on this foundation. We rest on Christ alone, bind us together. Lord, build your home. You build with broken bricks. You're stacking stone on this foundation. We rest on Christ alone, bind us together. Lord, build your home. In you we belong. You are our cornerstone. Every person, old and young, every nation, every tongue, no matter where we've been or where we're from, oh, your love holds us together as one.
Good morning, Crossing Church. How are you doing this morning? So good to see you. So glad that you're here, that we get to be here together, all of us at all of these locations all across the region. We are so glad that you get to join with us and we get to join with you, be one family in this whole region, just serving the Lord and proclaiming, making the Lord famous. It's just exciting to be a part of that. Hey, if you're online.tv inside, we're thankful for you and that we can count you as part of our number as well this weekend. And we had a great opportunity this last weekend to host business leaders from all over at a Global Leadership Summit that we hosted here. Over 400,000 people all over the world being involved in that. We were one of those. So we had 257 leaders, and I imagine that next year it'll be a lot larger than that. And it gave us an opportunity to just have some of those conversations, and that's always great to do that as well. And I'm excited about this new series. Last week, we talked about fake news. And there were so many of these statements that might sound true or we might want to lean into because our culture says it's true, but we found out that they're fake, and the Bible really speaks specifically about those things. And, it's amazing how much is out there in our world that's just really completely false. And we learned that there's a place where we can stand. There's a place where we can trust. There's a place where we can believe. And that's when we stand with Jesus and on the Word of God. And when we do those two things, we're going to be just fine. Last week, as we closed that series out, I was talking about how there's such similar realities 2,000 years ago to today. Like when we were talking about the Apostle Paul talking to Timothy, and he says, hey, in the last days, it's going to be like this and like this and like this and we're going through those, and it's like, wow, that's like right now. It's like reading the newspaper. It's like turning on the TV right now. I mean, especially when we went through those lists and then you see the headlines of Charlottesville, Virginia, and you're going, really? That we're still in an environment where this racism is happening and this hate is happening? How can we allow that? How can that can be possible? And it's so wrong. And I know that that's what we believe, but what's informing that? And today, as I talk from the book of Colossians, I want us to see that where that actually comes from, where we say we can have no tolerance for that, where it actually comes from. It's hard not to feel, though, like what Paul was saying to Timothy is not exactly what we're dealing with today, right? And there's a Bible book that literally fleshes this out. And it's the book of Colossians. When you read the book of Colossians, could just as easily be written for us now as it was 2,000 years ago for them then. Many of the circumstances are nearly identical. There's a lot of fake news that was coming into the Colossian church, and there were Christians who were actually giving into that and trying to conform to that culture. So to understand Colossians, we need to do a little bit of background, okay? Because that's where we're going to be for the next few weeks. We're just going to be diving into the book of Colossians and seeing how it connects with us today. But to start, where we have to go is to the church that birthed it, and that's Ephesus, the Ephesian church. Ephesus was the second largest city in the world at that time, only smaller than Rome. And Ephesus was a superstar church. Like if it was like the best church you could go to at the time, had the greatest leaders, had the Apostle Paul, had Apollos, had Priscilla and Aquila, had Timothy, had John the Apostle. Can you imagine those kinds of people for your pastors, for your leaders? Paul, the Apostle Paul, actually stayed in Ephesus longer than he stayed any other place in his entire ministry. He stayed there over 2 years. It's the only church recorded in the New Testament that actually had a permanent location. And it was seen as a model for all other churches. And one thing that Paul did while he was there was he raised up leaders. He raised up church planters. That's one of our core values is we raise leaders, right? And so that was what Paul was doing. He was raising leaders, and one of the guys that he raised up was a man named Epaphras. And Epaphras was a native of Colossae. Both Ephesus and Colossae were in what was called Asia Minor, or today, modern-day Turkey. And it was a smaller town next to two large cities. And the large cities, one you may have heard of, one you may not have. And it was Hierapolis and Laodicea. If you've read the book of Revelation, you've heard of Laodicea. Those were the two large cities, but Colossae was a small one. And it was Epaphras' native towns where he grew up. It was a town of great diversity. Had Jews, Gentiles, transients, traders, travelers. And the reason it was part of the trade route from east to west or west to east. So that meant people from India and China and all the Far East would actually, when they were trading, they would come through there to go to the west. And people that were from Rome or Europe would come through that same spot in order to go through the east. Okay? So when they did all of that, you can imagine what would happen. They would bring all kinds of teachings, all kinds of philosophies and ideas and religions along with them. And so the people of Colossae and the Colossian church would hear all this. They would hear about asceticism, which is basically withdrawing from all worldly pleasures and living apart, probably connected to the teachings of Buddha, because it came from the Far East. There was the worship of Cybele, which was the great mother, the mother of the mountain, a goddess that was connected to the worship of the earth or pantheism or cult paganism. So there was that. There was Confucianism, Taoism, Hinduism, and there was also Jewish mysticism, like Jewish magical stuff. And some of you are going, really? Like Jewish magical stuff? Yeah. How many of you ever heard of the term Kabbalah? Raise your hand if you've heard of the Kabbalah. Yeah. How many of you heard of Madonna? Yeah. Well, Madonna actually follows that as her religion, which is a modern-day version of Jewish mysticism. All of these things existing. And on top of all of that, there was some new religion that was emerging, and it was called Gnosticism. Gnosticism comes from a Greek word, gnosis, begins with the letter G, like gnosis. And what it means in the Greek language is to know, like to fully know, like I understand, like fully understand. And so these guys, since they were so humble, they named themselves the knowers. Like we know. Are you a knower? Because like obviously you're, that kind of thing. The knowers. And the Gnostics had this kind of core belief that everything that was spiritual was good and everything that was physical was evil. And you could disconnect spiritual from physical. What that meant was whatever I do physically or in my body has no bearing on spirituality, so I can live however I want. So it was like blatant hedonism. And they hated Christians and they hated Judaism and they hated New Testament and Old Testament. So they were the ones responsible for writing these false gospels. If you've ever watched the Discovery Channel and they've talked about like the Gospel of Judas or the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel to the Egyptians or any of these, those are all false letters that were written by Gnostics to try to discredit Christianity in its early years. The problem was, as they were circulating that and all this other stuff, it was leaching its way into that ancient church, particularly in Colossae. So people would actually join the church with these other beliefs in their heads, and then they would spread that false teaching inside the church. So Colossae, the church in Colossae was in trouble. They were in trouble, and it was coming from the inside, and they needed help. And Epaphras, their leader, needed help. And he needed somebody with some authority to come in there and speak truth into that church so they could be effective in their culture. You know what he needed? The Apostle Paul. So guess what he did? He left Colossae. He traveled to Rome, which is a long way, found the Apostle Paul in prison, told him what was going on, and then the Apostle Paul put pen to paper and he wrote the book of Colossians. The Apostle Paul had never been to Colossae. He had just sent Epaphras there. But he was that authority figure speaking truth into all that fake news that was rising up in Colossae. Now, this last series we were in reminded us that we live in a culture that abounds with all kinds of diverse attitudes and belief. And we've learned that people on the outside of the church and the inside of the church may believe things that are completely false, right? And give into those things. The question is, where does that come from? What is it that causes us to put that inside of us and allow that to be a part of our beliefs? Here's where it comes from. It comes from your world view. Now, when I say worldview, some of you may kind of go, I don't know what my worldview is, or I've not really thought of it. But we all have one. Whether or not we can articulate it or define it, we all have one, all right? And I want us to understand that today. I want us to understand what our worldview is, because this whole predicament in Colossae has to do with this. This is at the core of it, all right? So I want to show you a little chart here. And this is a chart that helps you define worldview. In the center of the chart is this question: what is real? My worldview comes from what I believe is real. Whatever I believe is real determines my beliefs. Does that make sense to you? If I believe this is the truth, then it determines what I believe. Okay, I'm saying this is true. My beliefs then determine my values. My values are the things that I say, these things are good and these things are bad. What is good? And out of my values come my behaviors. What I do, how I live, what I do with my hands and my feet and my mouth, and what I see and what I allow inside of me. So like my behaviors come from my values, which are determined by my beliefs, which comes from ultimately what I believe is real. Now, lay that over what happened in Charlottesville. So let's just look at something that's happening right now in real time and lay that over it. We see the behavior, right? We see this horrendous behavior. Do you know that behavior is actually coming out of values? And those values are coming out of beliefs. And those beliefs are coming out of what is at least perceived to be real. So if you believe in white supremacy, if you believe that white people are better, that's coming out of what you perceive to be real. That determines your values, and that determines your behavior. So when you think about Jesus, and you call yourself a Christian, what would be the core ethic that Jesus taught us? The absolute core ethic. Well, somebody asked him that once. What is the greatest commandment? You remember that? What did he say? He said to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Like, if you want to know what the core is, if I believe that Jesus is real, and I believe that what Jesus taught is real, then it will determine my beliefs. And my beliefs will be that it is my responsibility to love everybody, to love God and to love everybody else, right? Okay? All right, check this out. Now, if I love everybody else, and these are my beliefs, then it determines my values, right? So my values would be what? Everybody is of the same worth, right? And everybody is worth a lot. And it doesn't have anything to do with the color of their skin, for goodness sake. Right? So everybody is of equal value before the Lord. Okay? So my beliefs are informing my values, and then my values are informing my behavior. So this is how I live. Now let me challenge you. It is absolutely correct and right to hate racism. But you can't hate a racist. What? Think about Jesus on the cross. And there's guys that are holding the Son of God to the cross, the Son of God, the most perfect human being, perfect, absolutely perfect, and they're driving spikes through his flesh. And what does he say? Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And some of us are going, wait a minute. I can't do that. Well, understand, when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. And then he was asked the question after that, who is my neighbor? Jesus used that moment to talk about a person that other people had very racist thoughts about, Samaritans, to say, everybody's your neighbor. Wow. Let me tell you something. That is mind-blowing radical thinking, isn't it? Absolutely. So that means there is no place in a Christian's heart for hate. No place. There's no room. No room for racism and no room for hate. If Jesus is in the center. If he is where all the other, everything else in my life emanates, if he's my core value, right? So this is where fake news comes from. Whatever's fake on the inside comes to the outside, right? A flawed worldview. So the Colossians church was struggling with this, and many of us struggle with it today. The Colossians thought, listen to this, check this out, all religions are fundamentally the same and only superficially different. How many of you have heard people say that? Really, there's lots of ways to heaven. All religions are basically the same, and they just kind of have, this little, like that. Really? Some of you should be listening to Ravi Zacharias. He really teaches well on this whole process. How do I figure out that the truth is all religions are fundamentally different and only superficially the same? Because religions being basically the same is complete fake news. It's complete falsehood. So how do I know that? Well, let's just break religion down, okay? Think about all of the gazillions of religions that are in the world. You can break them down into 3 categories. Do you realize this? Just 3. Here's the first one. Only the universe exists. Well, when I say that, what I'm actually saying is God doesn't. Only the universe exists. God really doesn't exist. Now, who believes that God doesn't exist? Well, naturalists, people that believe that God didn't have anything to do with origin, he didn't have anything to do with creation, all of that. People that are total naturalists, that's what they believe. Animists, that's what they believe. People who worship animals, like a lot of African religions, are animistic religions. Confucianists, Taoists, and atheists. Wait a minute, atheism is not a religion. Oh, yes, it is. It's a belief system. All of them believe that only the universe exists, that God doesn't exist. Okay? How is that like all other religions? See, it makes no sense. It's fake news. Here's the second one. Only God exists. The universe doesn't. You're going, come on, really? There are actually people that believe that the chair I'm sitting in right now is not real. There's actually people that believe that my body is not real. That's crazy. That means you're calling all Buddhists and all Hindus crazy. Like there's billions of people that live and die every day believing that only God exists and not the universe. Wow. And then there's a third kind of belief. Both God and the universe exist. There's only 3 religions that believe that. They're all monotheistic. Here you go. Judaism, Islam, Christianity. That's it. So what have we just done? We have just shown that all religions are not basically the same and only superficially different. They're actually profoundly different. And it is fake news. So the Colossian church was dealing with this, and we deal with this today. The Apostle Paul addressed it in Colossians chapter 2. He said this, see to it that no one takes you captive, that's an important word, through hollow and deceptive philosophy. All religions are basically the same, which depends on human tradition and basic principles of this world, let's get along with our culture, rather than on Christ. He's calling them out. He's saying that's not true. So how do I know if my worldview is a tainted worldview? If I have a more Colossian worldview than the kind of worldview that the Apostle Paul is trying to teach me in the book of Colossians? Well, ask yourself 3 questions, all right? I'm going to have you think about these 3 questions. Number one, is it consistently logical? Does it make sense? Like, is it coherent with itself? Let me give you an example. Do you know what we call the head of Buddhism in the world? There's a title for that. When I tell you, you'll remember it. The Dalai Lama. How many of you have heard of the Dalai Lama? Okay. Well, in Buddhism, the primary desire of Buddhism is to rid oneself of all desire. Because you become one with God or God-like, and that's all that really exists, when you remove yourself from all desire. That's the essence of Buddhism. And the person who should be best at Buddhism would be the Dalai Lama, right? Now, what does the Dalai Lama want more than anything? The proper answer would be nothing, because he is striving for the absence of all desire. But if you Google the Dalai Lama, you know what he wants? He wants freedom for Tibet. It's all about, we got to have freedom for Tibet. He's constantly talking about freedom for Tibet, which is what? It's a desire. So like right in the middle of this belief, the head of the entire religion is showing the fallacy of the belief. It is not consistently logical. Here's another one. Is it empirically adequate? I know that's a big word, but what it just means is, can you verify it? Like with facts, with science, with history. I mean, is it verifiable? In Islam, you follow the Quran that was written by Muhammad, right? In the 7th century AD. And in the Quran, it says that Jesus did not die on the cross. He only seemed to die. That he never died on the cross. Okay, what's the problem with that? Okay, every historian that wrote about Jesus wrote that he died on the cross. So the Greeks wrote that, the Romans wrote that, the pagans wrote that, the Judaistic historians wrote that. None of them believed in Jesus. None of them believed in his message, but they all wrote the historical fact, contemporary with Jesus, that he died on the cross. So, if I believe in Islam, I have to take a departure from what is empirically adequate. I have to just forget what makes sense, and I can't verify it. Doesn't make any sense. Okay? Third one, is it relevant through experience? Does it actually work in your life? Does it make a difference? I want you to look at your worldview and ask yourself, are those things working for you right now? You see, the Colossians were allowing a wrong worldview to influence both their identity as Christians and their purpose as Christians. So the Apostle Paul wrote this in Colossians 2. He said, therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon, celebration, or Sabbath day. You see what people are doing? They're like, oh, you're this. They're judging. And so people, they want to conform to their culture. They don't want to be judged. And so they're allowing their faith to be changed so that it conforms to their culture. These are a shadow of things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. Don't let anyone who delights in false humility and the worship of angels disqualify you for the prize. Such a person goes into great detail about what he's seen, and his unspiritual mind puffs him up with idle notions. He has lost connection with the head, from whom the whole body, supported and held together by its ligaments and sinews, grows as God causes it to grow. Since you died with Christ to the basic principles of this world, why, as though you still belong to it, do you submit to its rules? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These are all destined to perish with use because they are based on human commands and teachings. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom, but with their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. What's happening is a compromise between a proper view of God and a desire to kind of live in your culture and be okay with your culture. Now, we're all saying, well, that's what, Colossians, those silly Colossians. And we're like, no, this is us. This is now. And you're going, come on, really? How many of you ever watched Friends, the sitcom? It's funny, isn't it? It is so funny. But what does it teach inside of all of that funniness? What kind of behaviors are inside? There's some good ones, but there's some that are like, wow, that's really kind of way off, right? Some of you are going, wow, I'm glad you said that because that's like so yesterday. How about Game of Thrones? When did porn become okay to watch? When did that become mainstream? How about The Wolf of Wall Street? How many F-bombs do you need to drop before it's like, that's enough? What do we allow ourselves to do and participate in because we want to be a part of our culture? Oh, this is not comfortable at all, Jerry. Right? Let me make it a lot more painful. How about safety and comfort? Safety and what could be wrong with safety and comfort? How many of us, the primary desires of our life are safety and comfort? How could that be bad? Safety and comfort? Oh yeah. When did Jesus ever promise you those two things? Didn't Jesus say something like, they hated me before they hate you, and if they hate me, they will hate you on account of me? Did he say that? Did he say, beware when people speak well of you? Did he say something like that once? Did he say, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow? Did he say that? Where's safety and comfort in that? Show me that. Because I don't see it in the teachings of Jesus. As a matter of fact, if you follow Jesus, you're kind of putting those up on the altar, safety and comfort. But are you thinking more about your retirement than tithing? Are you thinking more about serving yourself than serving the Lord or serving within a group of people? Are you thinking about your other friends as opposed to the ones that are encouraging you in your faith? Where is it? Because the truth is, if safety and comfort are the things that you're really striving for, then I can tell you what's in the center circle of your worldview. It's you. It's me. Wow. This is getting really uncomfortable. It's true, isn't it? I don't like saying that because I'm guilty of it. There's a constant struggle going on inside of me between wanting to do the things that God wants me to do and wanting to do the things that I want to do. There's a constant struggle in the center circle of my life of who is going to sit on the throne, who is going to be in charge. I need this book. I need this study because the Colossian church was slipping. It was struggling. They were desiring to connect culturally, and in the process, they fell into the confusion of the fake. And Paul's objective was to remind them that Jesus Christ is at the center of your faith. Nobody else. That Jesus is the embodiment of all truth. He defines what is good and what is bad, and how his followers are supposed to live their lives. And the question is, are we slipping? Are we struggling? Do we have this strong desire to connect culturally, and so to do that, we give in to the fake? And we allow the garbage in, and then the garbage comes out. And we, for some reason, have this crazy notion that it won't affect us. Of course it will affect us. We need this letter. We need this letter to remind us of the same things today that they dealt with then. That's why we're going to go through the book of Colossians, and we're going to go through every verse of it. And we're going to squeeze every bit of potential out of it, because I need to know how to live my life in this culture now and say, I know what's at the center of my life. I know what is true. I know what is good. I know how to live. There was a movie that came out a while back about Stephen Hawking. And it was called the theory of everything. This is called the truth of everything. This is not a theory. It's the truth. Because Jesus is the truth. And if Jesus is the truth, there is only one place that he needs to be, and that is dead center in my life and dead center in your life. Now, thank you. Praise God. I hope it's an honest clap. Like, I want to do that. I really want to live that. How many of you heard that people say the church is full of hypocrites? How many of you are hypocrites? Look around you and see who's not raising their hands. Because that's true. Church is full of hypocrites, and I'm a hypocrite. And I'll tell you where that hypocrisy is. In that center circle of my life, sometimes, if you look at me, it looks great because Jesus is sitting on the throne. He's in the chair, you know. And so I'm just kneeling before him, and he is in the chair. And then there's times, if you were to look at me and see me as I am, I'm sitting in the chair, and Jesus is standing there going like this, which means you're sitting in my chair. Get out of my chair. What we're going to do now at all of our locations is we're going to take some time to ask two questions. Question number one, what's going on in the center? And if you are a Christian, we're going to ask the question, who's sitting in the chair? We're moving to a time of decision.
Colossians really approaches you at the foundation of who you are. And that's a scary place to be. Sometimes in life, we do things without even realizing why we do them or who could be affected because of it. When you look at why you do what you do, ask the questions Jerry just said. What is at the center of my life? Is it Jesus? If we approach every situation with Jesus at the heart of who we are, then he will always be by our side. It's when we put ourselves at the center that we fail, that we miss out on opportunities, and we come unprepared because we thought that we could do it on our own. Ask yourself, what is true and good? If I don't have a moral compass rooted in truth, then my compass, it's no good. How many of you would use a compass that randomly changes directions whenever it wanted? None of you would. Not when you need to rely on its truth despite the circumstances. When we root our moral compass to Jesus, his word, his truth never changes. It stayed the course for over 2,000 years, and it will continue for 2,000 more. You can trust it. And the last one is the hardest. How do you live? When people look at you, at your life, what do they see? Do they see Jesus? When you are a Christian, you are an ambassador of Christ. It says so in 2 Corinthians 5. When people hear about Jesus and what he can do in your life, they need an example of what that looks like. And that's on you. But oh man, but Joey, do you realize how hard that actually is? I do, because I struggle with it too. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but the key is that we were never meant to do it alone. You want to be a great dad, a great mom, a great spouse? Then make Jesus the center of your life. Use his word as a moral compass for what is good and what is true. Live your life the way he has already laid out for you, and you've got it. The roadmap is there. We just have to follow it. So right now, what you need to do is you need to answer those questions honestly in your life. Examine your heart and then lay what you need to at the feet of Jesus. Don't let this moment pass you by. Let him take control of your life and let him use you in a new and incredible way. Let's go to him right now.
can't see, I believe. When my spirit's crushed, 'cause the pain is just too much. And even when it hurts, and you feel far from me, I believe. You will not abandon me. You will not abandon me. Lover of my soul, you won't let me go. I believe. When my shame tells me that my sin is just too deep, you don't love me when I feel empty, I believe. 'Cause you will not abandon me. You will not abandon me. Lover of my soul, you won't let me go. I believe. 'Cause you will not abandon me. You will not abandon me. Lover of my soul, you won't let me go. I believe. Jesus, you have me. Jesus, you have me. Jesus, you have me. And I'm yours. Oh, Jesus, you love me. Jesus, you love me. Jesus, you love me. And I'm yours. Oh, you will not abandon me. You will not abandon me. Lover of my soul, you won't let me go. I believe. 'Cause you will not abandon me. 'Cause you will not abandon me. Lover of my soul, you won't let me go. I believe. Oh, lover of my soul, you won't let me go. I believe. Light of God, you find us so enough. Holy Spirit drawing us to come. Bearing all our burdens, we are safe in your arms. Broken chains are falling to our feet. Grace and streams of mercy covering. Every guilt and shame are washed away in you now. Matchless love is calling us to our knees at the foot of the cross. Your precious Calvary. Every guilt and shame washed away in you now. The matchless love is calling us to our knees at the foot of the cross. Your precious blood spilled for us. We were done by the depths of your love. Love is all we need. Your blood set us free. No greater love, no greater name than Jesus. Your love is all we need. Your blood set us free. No greater love, no greater name than Jesus. Matchless love is calling us to our knees at the foot of the cross. Precious blood spilled for us. We were done by the depths of your love. We were done by the depths of your love. Oh, we were done by the depths of your love.
One thing that has never changed over the desire to connect culturally is communion. The fact that Jesus died on a cross for our sins stands true just as much today as it did back then. Communion is all about reflecting on that fact. It's about examining your heart, seeing where you and God are in your relationship, and spending some time one-on-one with Him to recenter your heart. We do this every week by taking a piece of bread and a cup of juice. It represents Jesus' body and His blood broken and poured out for us. Together, as one church, let's spend some time with our Savior right now. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed our service. You can join us live at thecrossing.tv on Thursdays at 6 p.m. and Sundays at 9 a.m. and 10:45 a.m., all in the Central Time Zone. If any questions, you can always contact me at joeyh@thecrossing.net. Once again, thanks for watching.